I'm excited now because we're going to talk about Chapter 6, Learning Disabilities. I kind of cut my teeth on learning disabilities in the area of special ed, which is an old expression meaning that's what I learned about first. Learning disabilities. Oh, to be the teacher who helps a child. Look at the verse on slide 2. Then he opened their minds so they could understand the scriptures. Luke chapter 24, verse 45. To help a child learn to read is one of the most meaningful things that a teacher will ever do. I remember very well how I had a young girl come to me one time. She was in elementary school, and she said, "Teacher, I want to learn to read because I want to be able to read my grandmother's Bible." She was in first grade. Do you think I worked hard with that young lady? You better believe it. I sure did. And sure enough, she was able to overcome a lot of things that had happened to her in her life, and she was able to read. By the time she left, being under my watchful eye, and I've always been glad that I could say that, a specific learning disability means, and you'll see the big fat federal definition on page 3, which you don't really need to memorize, but you do need to understand. Okay? Basically, it's someone who has average intelligence, but they have trouble either in using oral language or written language. They may have difficulty listening, thinking, speaking, reading, writing, spelling, or doing math. So pretty much someone with average intelligence, as it shows on slide 4, but who's functioning 2 or more grade levels below grade placement. So in other words, I'm in 3rd grade, but I can only recognize words maybe on a kindergarten level or a 1st grade level, if that. That might be a child who has a learning disability in reading, and of course, same thing with math. A child who's not able to even do basic computational skills yet, but they're in 3rd grade and can't even do basic adding and subtracting. So they might be 2 or more years behind grade level. Next, you see a YouTube video that you can watch that tells you a little bit more about disabilities. And then, when you finish that one, come back to slide 6. What are some of the possible probable causes of LD? It may be genetic. See these young fellas to the right? You can tell by looking at them that they're probably related. And I want you to ask me in class who they are. I'll be interested in seeing who asked me first. Well, learning disabilities can be genetic, meaning you inherited it from a parent or grandparent. Things that happen prenatally, for instance, the parent being involved in some kind of substance abuse or drinking alcohol or something along those lines, may cause a learning disability, or mother's in an accident when she's pregnant, some kind of birth trauma while the child's being born, oxygen being cut off to the brain, for instance, or sometimes things that happen shortly after the delivery. The child contracts some kind of illness which may affect the brain. What about diet? Oh, there's a lot of controversy about diet, and that's been going on since the 1960s and 70s, I think, and certainly since the time I started teaching. You hear a lot of things about, oh, it's red food coloring, oh, children are having too much sugar, and so forth. You'll have some physicians that say that they believe that wholeheartedly, and others who will tell you it doesn't make a bit of difference. So you can read and read many articles about it all you want. And I guess my thing is, I don't concern myself as much with the causes as I do with, okay, here's this child coming to me right now, and I want to be able to help this child learn to read, write, do math, whatever it is that the child has a disability in, and help them to improve. Here's 10 myths about learning disabilities, and click on that and look and see what those 10 myths are, and maybe take some notes for yourself on them. Next, slide 8 tells you about some of the reading disorders that there are. The first one I presume you've heard of. 3 of these at least come from the Latin word dys, D-Y-S. Okay, that means disability, so that should tell you something. I'm throwing in a free Latin lesson for you. For instance, the first one, the root word is lexi. Lexi means books. So, Number one, disability in books, hence disability with reading. Number two, what's the root word? What does it look like? What does it remind you of? Probably the first or second word that would pop in your mind would be phonics, right? So that tells you disability in phonics, learning how to sound out words or say words. And that's a big issue. And I'd love to say, you know, hey, everyone is not hooked on phonics. And of course, that's a program that you can buy, and it's very helpful to many, many children. But there are some children who are never going to comprehend that letter sound combination and what it really means, and they don't relate to sounding out words. And you can let them watch Hooked on Phonics videos or do phonics worksheets until, as the country people say, the cows come home, and they're never going to get it. They just have to learn by being a sight word reader. Number three, comprehension deficits. People who just do not understand what they read, or they are such a poor reader, they stumble over words so that by the time they get to the end of a sentence, they don't even know what they just read. And I had a child I was helping with that one time, and I could tell him what I was going to ask him at the end of the sentence, and then I'd say, now read me the sentence, and he would stumble over so many of the words on his grade level that then I could say, now what, was this about? And he had no idea. If you have a child who's stumbling that much while he's reading, it doesn't do him any good to have a on grade level book because he can't read it. You need to find something he can read wherever he is as far as his reading level. And the same thing with math. Start the child where he or she is and let them build up. Next word, 4, disfluency. Now that should give you another clue. Again, are you reading Latin yet like you should be? Being fluent in something means what? To be good at it, or to be able to do it easily. Like you think of regular English, being a fluent reader means that you're able to read things quickly and comprehend what it means. Well, again, if you are stuttering, stammering over words, you can't recognize words quickly, you have a very poor sight word vocabulary, or you have very poor word attack skills, you're going to have a disability in being able to read quickly and well. And then there are children, this is the last one on here, children who just don't have the vocabulary. They don't know enough words and what words mean because they may come from a home where the parents don't speak English. They may come from a home where the parents are intellectually disabled, have some kind of disability themselves, and don't talk, or just don't talk to the child that much. Astoundingly, there's children who come to school and they've never held a book. No one in their home has sat down and taught them words, books, how to hold a book, how to look at a book. And so those children start out far behind, you can imagine. And so those are just some of the types of reading disabilities. Here's a video on dyslexia that you might find informative, so watch that and then come back to slide 10. Now, what about some of these math disabilities? Well, there's two main ones that cause children to end up in a resource class, or if they're in a self-contained class for reading, they may also be in there for math. First one, dyscalculia, basic math skills. Add, subtract, multiply, divide. Maybe the child can do basic addition, but then when you get to 2-digit or 3-digit addition and you have to learn to regroup, or as people of my age cohort say, carry, they don't know how to do it, they don't get it, they make constant errors. And then particularly with subtraction, when you have to do regrouping in subtraction, or as folks in my age group would say, you have to cross it out and carry the 10 over. When you're doing the problem, they never understand that for a long, long time. And they have to have frequent examples and maybe a sign up in the classroom that gives a sample that they can follow step by step in order to get those done. Have a lot of trouble sometimes just memorizing things like multiplication facts. Okay? Now, look at this problem in number 2. What do you need to know to solve number 2? Well, first of all, it would help if you're a good reader. I've seen numerous children who, if they got to the name of the child in this little word problem, and they couldn't pronounce that, then they just quit. And I had to teach many of my children with reading disabilities, hey, don't worry about the person's name. Look at what they're doing, what they're buying, what they're getting, what they're taking, what they're giving, and figure out what to do with the numbers. Just say, if X buys a soft drink for $1.25 and a candy bar for 87 cents, how much change will she get back? And you have to teach children keywords. When you see two numbers close together and it says and, most of the time you're going to do what? Add. If it says how much back, it's probably subtracting. And a lot of children will just look at this. They have poor reading skills and poor math skills, and they'll just write those three down and add them up. But they may write that as $87, and then add that, and that's their answer. They don't understand how to read it and realize there's more than one step involved here. So you have to take a lot of time and give them a lot of examples. And unfortunately, a lot of the worksheets I see that teachers give children and a lot of word problems, problem-solving activities that are done in classrooms up on the smartboard or in books or workbooks, again, they will have maybe 25 basic computation problems on the page, and at the bottom they'll have one or two problem-solving type things. And you do add and then you subtract for this one, and then the next problem will be something entirely different. So the children never get enough practice at doing those type of skills they need to solve those problems. And that's unfortunate because it takes a long time for children for many children, especially those with a learning disability in math, to learn what to do. They need a lot more practice to be able to learn that. Then there's other types of learning disorders having to do with handwriting, okay? Dysgraphia, illegible handwriting. Now, I have to admit, I don't have really great handwriting, and if you've looked at some of the papers I've handed back, you'll say, yeah, her handwriting is not real good. That's why I print a lot. Of course, I'm left-handed. And back in the day, when little Cindy was in kindergarten and first grade, my mother went to my teacher, and this was in the state of Texas, and said, her handwriting is so poor. What can you do to help her? The teacher's response back in about, probably 1960, 1961, was, oh, she's left-handed. She'll just write like that. No attempt was made to correct my writing. That's not too good, is it, teachers? No. So I have bad handwriting. Plus, I don't have real good fine motor skills, which makes it even worse. However, I think we can all say that that does not seem to have held me back from an academic career. Well, I guess not. Look where I am now. Another type of writing disorder, and this one's really more important because now, even children type a lot of things, right? You're keyboarding, and you don't have to do handwriting as much. But written expression, I see many college students who have this problem. They have difficulty in organizing thoughts for even just one paragraph and getting them down on paper. They make multiple grammatic errors and spelling errors even in one paragraph. Either not proofreading, rushing through something, and not going back to check the spelling and the grammar, or they really never learned the grammatical rules because in their English classes in high school, most of the time was spent on literature. Now, I'm an English minor. That's what I was. I almost was an English teacher. I considered majoring in that in college, but I changed my mind and went into elementary ed and then into the field of special ed when I work on my master's. So I do look for this on people's papers, and some of you may have, to your dismay, already noticed that I'm marking your papers a lot, because I want you to learn the right way to write things and do things so that when you are a teacher out there, you're sending home letters to parents and you're filling out forms for the principal or for the district office, and you take the time to make sure they're done correctly. Even simple things like Facebook postings. I see so many typos and so many errors and people spelling words incorrectly, and the public is seeing that. Whoever can look at your Facebook page can see that. And even I make errors sometimes, but usually I'll go back and catch it and then I do the little edit thing. You know, when you're typing a paper to turn in, you have spell check. However, you have to have written your thoughts down in an organized manner so that it will make sense to the reader. Sometimes it's really a good idea to hand a paper to your roommate or to a friend or a teacher from a different class and say, hey, would you just read this for me and tell me if it makes sense? And they may catch, you know, half a dozen things that you can easily correct, and then your grade's much higher. Think about that. Just a tip. Okay, next slide, 12. Language deficits. There are a couple of main language deficits that children may have. One is the expressive language disorders, oral expression. In other words, how do you express yourself? How do you talk? How do you explain your feelings, your thoughts, your emotions, or content that you've read and you're trying to answer in class? Are you good at doing that or not? If you're not, you may not answer in class much because you don't want your classmates to laugh at you, or the teacher to kind of give you the evil eye, like, what are you talking about? But practice is what helps a person to do better. Same thing with giving talks and oral presentations. Well, there's also receptive language deficits, people who do not comprehend because they don't listen well, or maybe they have ADD or ADHD and their mind's kind of drifting off, and they're not paying attention. Well, look at your textbook on page 139, and you'll see some more things about this. Also, pragmatics, use of language in social settings. When you're with your friends, you probably have certain private jokes that you can just say 2 or 3 words of and everyone cracks up laughing. But your parent maybe walks in the room and is like, why are you laughing? And you repeat the line and they don't get it. Okay? So that's kind of somewhat the use of pragmatics, but how do you use language when you're not up doing a presentation? Next slide. Memory issues. This also can sometimes be a big part of a learning disability. Short-term memory. What did I just say on that last slide? What was it about? Do you remember? If not, short-term memory. Now, how about long-term memory? What did we learn about last week? Can you remember what our topic was last week? Can you write 10 things that you learned last week in a given class? If that's hard for you, there are a lot of memory strategies and mnemonics and things that you can use, like using acronyms. Now, most of you ought to know what that means. And I know you music ed people do. Does that jar anyone's memory? How about you typers, when you took typing? Might mean something to you. If you're not sure, ask someone when you see them or ask me. That's a good one for keyboarding class there in particular. Next slide. Cognitive deficits can affect a person's ability to make decisions, to respond quickly, to adjust to changes, your ability to think or reason. Many people who have a learning disability in this area need structure. They need organized, step by step. How do I solve these math problems? Step by step. How am I going to learn to read this song so that I can play my instrument? Step by step. How do you go about writing a one-page essay? They need the actual steps written down so that they can follow them and then check them off, and they'll do much better if teachers provide that kind of information for them. Next we see metacognition, and again you should have had that one back in human growth and development, that word, that term, but thinking about thinking. People who don't listen well often have difficulty with this one, and people need to be able to sit and think, now what strategy can I use to tackle this problem? And I'll give you a real simple basic example. You're out there on I-26 and your car just stops running. What are you going to do? Well, nowadays most of you have a phone. So you'll probably call either a parent, a spouse, a friend, some other relative, or you may just call a tow truck Or if you're fortunate and you have a car service, you may call them to come out and check your car and see if they can get it running or not, right? But people who have metacognitive disorders have trouble deciding what to do next. You know, you have to be able to, and this is an old term from teacher ed, but monitor and adjust. If the copier's broken and there's no way for you to make copies of something you were going to give to the children today, what are you doing now? You need a plan B. Oh, I'm going to use a smartboard for all my lessons. Sure you are. Till the power goes out. Then what are you doing, teacher? You always have to have a plan. Oh, I'm going to, show them everything then on the projector. Well, the bulb blows, and the librarian reports she has no more bulbs for you to put one in that projector. Now what are you doing? You have to be able to think ahead, and having a strong prefrontal cortex helps you to do that. Helps you to plan, helps you to organize. It also helps you to think, okay, last week the smartboard went down. And if that happens again this week, what other things do I have that I can give these children to do if the smartboard is not working? I see many, many teachers today who are so dependent on technology that if it doesn't work, they get frustrated very quickly because they have no other ideas about what they can do other than, okay, pull out a book and read. They're not prepared, so you have to think about these kind of things ahead of time. And that's having good metacognitive skills. Some people have learning disabilities in the area of perception. Some of you have probably seen those posters, or maybe when you were a child you had fun with these posters and books, things like Where's Waldo? And you'll have a very busy picture. It might be a picture of a farm or a city street, and you have to hunt for a character. Or you remember puzzles from when you were a child, and it would, maybe in the comic strips or comic book or something like that, or some child's activity book, and it's, there are 6 hidden objects in this picture. Find them. If you were able to find the 6 objects pretty quickly, you might have good visual perceptual skills. But some people don't. They can look for an hour and not find those 6 things. If you ask me in class, I'll show you some samples of some of those things. But some people have a lot of trouble in interpreting what they see. They have what's known as either a cognitive auditory deficit or a central auditory processing deficit, also known as CAP, central auditory processing deficit, meaning they're hearing the words that someone says, but somehow in between their ear and the brain, the message is not getting through right. It's scrambled. And they have a lot of trouble doing things like following step-by-step directions. So again, those are children who may need you to verbally tell them and then to write on the board or have on a poster board or a chart tablet or something the rules that they need to do to solve certain problems or get through certain work. Otherwise, they're going to have to ask you 20 times, what's next? What's next, teacher? What's next? Now what, miss? Now what, sir? And you'll be the one feeling like you're going nuts because you didn't properly plan to help that child when they tell you that child has some processing deficits. Motor skills can also affect children who have learning disabilities, and we've talked about these before, but the gross motor skills and the fine motor skills. Children who have poor motor skills sometimes have learning disabilities also in areas such as reading in particular. We're not always sure why that is, but it does happen. Fine motor skills, of course, you can imagine that one back again to handwriting. And so these are some of the activities that you can do to help children. And of course, physical education personnel, if they're aware a child has gross motor skills, they can try to come up with some activities to help that child practice and things the child can do at home to help improve balance and the gross motor skills. And fine motor, in elementary school, you do a lot of these things. Cutting, gluing things, cutting out pictures, gluing them, putting them on a poster or something like that. Doing handwriting, playing with clay, Play-Doh, maybe simple sewing, putting puzzles together. All those things can help children improve their fine motor skills, which may indeed help improve their handwriting. Here's a very long link, but it has to do with talking to parents. So click on that and check it out. And thank you for listening.